Today I'm going to be going over my top 4 tips at bass music production. And to start with, tip number 1, I'm going to be talking about drums and drum layering. So I have 2 drum loops, one on the right here, one on the left, and they're pretty basic 4 to the floor patterns. So to start with, I have this one. Just a pretty basic kick and snare pattern. But what I've done is on this side over here, I got quite a few layers going on, and what this does is it builds upon that basic 4x4 pattern, but it adds a lot more flavor to it. I'm going to be going over these kicks in just a moment. What I've done here, start with what I've done is I have added a claps and layered some snares to it. Okay, so I got some snares and claps layered here, each with a very different transient, and then I have some rides on it. And I want to go into more of what the rides do. I've kind of always thought of rides as, instead of just like a hat that's on top, adding another rhythm to it, I use rides in a way to kind of insinuate the kick and snares, so just to add that high-end texture to them. And I'm going to move on to my kicks down here. What I have is I have a few layers. I have a sub layer, mid layer, and a high layer. So here's the sub. Then I have the mid layer, which I actually used a Lindrum kick. It's kind of give it a vintage feel. And on the top I got, it sounds more like a click. And all together they sound like this. All kinds of transients going on, and together with the rides and snares. Something I would like to do though is kind of get the ones that hit on the kick and the lower the velocity down a bit. Kind of give it a side chaining feel. And then what I've also added to give more emphasis on the snare is a pre-snare and a reverse snare. It sounds like this. And the reason I've done that, well, I've added a reverse snare on every other one, is because that reverse snare is going to make it a lot less boring. Instead of waiting for the next pre-snare, we're more focused on waiting on one of these. And that gives you a lot more time in that loop to, I guess, make it less boring. Alright, now what I want to talk about next is actually the sub basses and rhythms. So here I've got a sub bass. It's a pretty good, strong sub bass. And one of the things I want to point out with this is the pattern. Now, what I'd like to do is I'll use this off fixed grid, turning it off, and adding these spaces in between to notice these little bits instead of having them connected, because when they're connected it'll sound like one long note, and that's not what we want. We want it to feel like it's punching. So, and we can even tell the difference if I were to have it on legato. That sounds cool and all, but what I want is that kind of punching sound. So I may use something that's legatoed later in the song that's not as supposed to be as, like, you know, punchy. Another thing I want to talk about is actually the bass sound design itself. So it's not just a simple sine, it's actually a sine with a little bit of transient in it, which kind of fills up the space but doesn't make it so distorted. And I have a noise layer with it too. It's going along with the pitch. A little bit of distortion and cutting out just a little bit of the high end. So that really gives the track a lot more emphasis on the sub that we don't have to worry about filling it in as much with other basses like that. So I can get this going. And then I have the sidechain, of course. Alright. And for tip number 3, it's going to be layering sounds along with the sub bass. So this one I see is always kind of tricky. I personally like to use samples when layering it along with the sub bass, just because you can do a lot more with it. So in this track I actually don't have much going on. I have these two sounds, and then this on top, and then these sounds over here. So all together that sounds like. Just turn that on. So the sounds in this track aren't very more bass layers. Oop. Aren't much of bass layers, but what they are is more of like noise layers. And I feel like that's always an important thing to look out for. So looking at these, let's start from the top. This is just a what is this? Looks like a sample bass sound. It looks like an F sharp. It's just that sound. I cut out the low end and I added a reverb on it. Kind of sounds like a frog or a gun, but yeah, that just kind of adds a lot more, because it's like the same thing with these risers up here, these reverse snares. You're having more emphasis on the second part of these. What is this, 2 bars? Yeah. And then down here what I have is, we'll start with this. This is more like a horn sound. I actually may add it over here, so I kind of like how it sounds. But it's a synth frog. And I got a riser right here, which was originally quite a long riser, but I've shortened down. And then I have a virtual riot sample, which I pitched down quite a bit, and kind of use that to lead it into the bass. And then we got these sounds up here, which is actually going to lead me into tip number 4, which is actually resampling your parts of your music. So this was actually this sound right here. Now what's cool is how different it sounds after resampling it. So if I were to put this up here, yeah, you can do quite a lot with resampling. So that's how I get tails like that, whatnot. And what you want to do with these tails is, once you have them, you want to reverse them and put them at the start of songs and whatnot. Or not the start of songs, but the start of a different sound. That way it leads into it instead of it just being too sudden, but it also kind of fills out your frequency spectrum. With all that said, thank you for watching. If y'all have any questions, comments, leave them below. Like and subscribe. Thank you.